The shuttle bay of Kepler Station buzzed with activity as the first group of human cadets stepped onto the metal platform. Jawook looked around at the massive space station that would be their home for the next 2 years. The walls stretched high above them, covered in strange symbols and lights that pulsed in patterns he did not understand. "Stay close together," Hana whispered to the group. She carried a small bag with her tools and electronics. Her eyes moved quickly, taking in every detail of the alien technology around them. The other species at the station looked at the humans with curious eyes, some whispering among themselves. Daeho stood tall and straight, his military training showing in the way he held himself. He had led soldiers before, but never in a place like this. The gravity felt different here, lighter than Earth's pull. Kijun shifted his weight, getting used to the strange feeling. His hands moved to where his weapons would normally be, but they had been told to come unarmed. Yuna listened to the sounds around them. She could hear at least 6 different languages being spoken, each one with its own rhythm and music. Her mind was already working to find patterns in the alien speech. This was what she did best, finding meaning in chaos. A tall, blue-skinned alien approached their group. Its skin seemed to be made of crystal that caught and reflected the station's lights. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I am Commander Vexthari of the Altarian Empire," the alien said. Its words came out slowly, as if it was not used to speaking the human language. "I will oversee your integration into the Galactic Defense Academy. Follow me." The humans walked behind Commander Vexthari through long corridors filled with beings they had never seen before. Some aliens floated instead of walking. Others had too many arms or eyes in strange places. One group had skin that changed colors as they moved. "The Academy has trained soldiers from over 40 different species," Vexthari explained as they walked. "Each species brings their own strengths to our military. The crystalline people, like myself, are excellent at long-range planning. The insectoids work well in groups. The reptilian dominion produces the strongest individual fighters." Jawook listened carefully. He noticed that Vexthari did not mention what humans might be good at. This did not surprise him. Earth had only joined the Galactic Union 6 months ago. No one really knew what humans could do yet. They entered a large room filled with desks and strange equipment. Other alien cadets were already seated, working on devices that looked nothing like human computers. The technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic to the newcomers from Earth. "These are your study stations," Vexthari said. "You will spend many hours here learning about galactic military doctrine, proper formations, and acceptable loss calculations." The phrase "acceptable loss calculations" made Daeho's jaw tighten. In his experience, every life mattered. There was no such thing as an acceptable loss when real people were involved. Another alien instructor entered the room. This one looked like a giant insect with multiple arms and compound eyes that seemed to look in all directions at once. Its movements were quick and precise. "This is Drill Master Click Tar," Vexthari announced. "He will handle your physical training and combat simulations." Click Tar's voice buzzed when he spoke. "New species always think they know about fighting. You will learn that individual creativity is weakness. Group coordination is strength. Follow the rules and you might survive." Hana raised her hand. "What if the rules don't work for a specific situation?" The 2 alien instructors looked at each other. Clicktar's compound eyes focused on her with what might have been amusement. "The rules have been developed over thousands of years by species far more advanced than yours," he buzzed. "They always work. Your job is to learn them, not to question them." Yuna caught the tone in his voice. It was the same tone adults used when talking to children who asked too many questions. She exchanged glances with Jawook, who had noticed it too. The aliens showed them to their sleeping quarters. Each human had a small room with a bed, desk, and storage space. The walls were bare metal, and everything was designed for function rather than comfort. That evening, the 5 humans met in Daeho's room to talk about their first day. "Did you see how they looked at us?" Kijun said. "Like we're some kind of pet project." "They think we're primitive," Jawook said quietly. Vexthari kept talking about how advanced the other species are, how much they have to teach us. Hana pulled out a small device she had been working on during the day. "I've been watching their technology. It's impressive, but it's also predictable. Everything follows the same patterns, same rules. That's what bothers me," Daeho said. "In real combat, rules get broken. The enemy doesn't follow your doctrine. They do whatever it takes to win." Yuna nodded. I've been listening to how they talk about military strategy. It's all about following procedures and maintaining formations. But what happens when the procedures don't fit the problem? Then you adapt, Jae-wook said simply. That's what humans do. We adapt. The next morning brought their first real test. The 5 humans were led to a large simulation room where holographic displays showed a space battle scenario. Dozens of alien cadets from different species were already at their stations, working through the exercise with practiced efficiency. This is a standard fleet engagement simulation, explained a third instructor, a tall alien with gray skin and large black eyes. Your goal is to minimize losses while achieving the objective. Most new species require several months to master this scenario. The simulation began. Enemy ships appeared on the displays, moving in precise formations toward a defended position. The alien cadets responded by moving their own ships into textbook defensive patterns, following procedures that had been used for centuries. Jae-wook watched the scenario unfold and felt a familiar feeling in his stomach. He had seen this before, not in space, but in the mountains of Korea where he had trained. The enemy was following a predictable pattern, which meant they could be predicted and countered. "Hana," he said quietly, "can you see what's powering those enemy ships in the simulation?" She studied her displays for a moment. "Yes, they're using standard fusion drives. Why?" "Because those drives have exhaust patterns," Jae-wook replied. "And exhaust patterns create blind spots." The other humans looked at him with growing understanding. They had all trained in environments where survival meant thinking beyond the rules, where creativity was the difference between victory and defeat. The alien instructors watched from their observation platform, expecting to see the humans struggle with the advanced technology and sophisticated tactics. They had no idea that they were about to witness something that would shake the foundations of galactic military thinking. The first training simulation was about to begin, and nothing would ever be the same. The simulation room filled with the soft hum of holographic projectors as the space battle scenario loaded completely. Jae-wook found himself staring at a 3-dimensional map, showing a mining station under attack by overwhelming enemy forces. The odds were 10-1 against the defenders. Around him, alien cadets from various species began implementing standard defensive protocols. Their movements were smooth and practiced, like a dance they had performed many times before. Ships moved into predetermined positions, weapons charged in sequence, and communications followed established patterns. "The objective is to hold the mining station for as long as possible," announced the gray-skinned instructor. "Calculate acceptable losses and prepare withdrawal routes when the position becomes untenable." Daeho felt his hands clench into fists. Everything about this exercise felt wrong to him. The aliens were already planning to retreat before the battle had truly begun. They were thinking about acceptable losses instead of thinking about how to win. "Jae-wook," he said quietly, "this feels like the siege exercises we ran back home." Jae-wook nodded. He was studying the mining station's layout on his display. The station had industrial equipment, mining shuttles, processing plants, and storage facilities. To the alien cadets, these were just background details in a space combat scenario. To him, they were resources waiting to be used. "Hana, what kind of equipment does a mining station have?" he asked. She quickly accessed the station's specifications. Plasma cutters, explosive charges for asteroid braking, electromagnetic launchers for moving heavy materials, fusion reactors for power. Her eyes widened as she understood what he was thinking. Oh, all of this could be weaponized. Yuna was listening to the communication channels between the alien cadets. Their coordination was impressive, but it followed strict patterns. "They're using standard fleet communication protocols," she reported. "Very organized, but also very predictable." Kijun had been studying the enemy attack formation. "The attacking ships are following textbook assault patterns. They expect us to respond with textbook defense patterns. What if we don't?" Jae-wook asked. The 5 humans huddled together while around them. Alien cadets continued their methodical preparations. The instructors watched from their observation platform, occasionally making notes about the humans' apparent confusion. "Look," Jae-wook said, pointing to his display. "The enemy is advancing in a standard formation because they expect us to meet them in space with our ships. But what if we don't?" "What do you mean?" Daeho asked. "What if we let them get close to the mining station, close enough that they can't use their big weapons without damaging what they're trying to capture?" Hana's mind was racing. If they get that close, we could use the mining equipment against them. The plasma cutters have the same output as military weapons. The explosive charges could be turned into mines. The mining shuttles are small and fast, Kijun added. They could move in patterns that big warships can't track easily. Yuna looked at the communication systems. And if we break their communication protocols, their coordination advantage disappears. The enemy ships were approaching the mining station now. Around the simulation room, alien cadets were preparing to meet them with a standard defensive screen, planning to trade ships in an organized retreat. The humans began to act. Jaewook took control of the mining station's systems while Hana started modifying the industrial equipment. Instead of launching their defensive ships to meet the enemy in open space, they pulled them back to the station itself. "What are they doing?" Commander Vexthari asked from the observation platform. "They're abandoning the proper defensive perimeter." Kliktar's compound eyes focused on the human section. Perhaps they don't understand the simulation parameters, but the humans understood perfectly. They just weren't playing by the expected rules. As the enemy ships closed in on the mining station, expecting to face a weakened defense after breaking through the outer perimeter, they instead found themselves flying into a trap, unlike anything in standard military doctrine. Hana had turned the mining station's plasma cutters into automated defense turrets. The electromagnetic launchers that normally moved asteroid chunks were now hurling explosive charges at enemy ships. The mining shuttles, piloted by Kijun's tactical programs, swarmed around the larger enemy vessels like angry insects. Yuna had hacked into the enemy communication systems, using patterns she had learned from listening to the alien cadets. She began broadcasting false orders and conflicting information, turning the enemy's own coordination protocols against them. Daeho coordinated the defense like a ground commander, treating the mining station as a fortress and the space around it as terrain to be controlled rather than empty void to be crossed. The results were devastating. Enemy ships found themselves under attack from directions they had never considered. Their sensors, designed to track military vessels, had trouble targeting industrial equipment that was firing at them. The mining shuttles were too small and too numerous for their weapon systems to handle effectively. Worse, their own communications were turning into chaos as Yuna's false signals created confusion throughout their formation. Ships began firing on their own allies, convinced they were enemy vessels broadcasting wrong identification codes. Within 90 minutes, the simulation ended with a complete victory for the defenders. Not a single enemy ship remained, and the mining station was intact. The simulation room fell silent. "Run diagnostic on the simulation systems," Commander Vexthari ordered. There must be a malfunction. But the diagnostics showed no errors. The simulation had run perfectly. The humans had simply approached the problem in a way that broke every assumption the program had been designed around. "How?" Kliktar buzzed, his compound eyes fixed on the humans. Jaewook stood up from his station. "We didn't fight the battle you designed. We fought the battle that was actually happening." The mining station wasn't just a location to defend, Hana added. It was a resource to use. "The enemy formation was optimized to fight ships in space," Kijun said. "It wasn't designed to handle industrial equipment used as weapons. Their communication protocols were efficient for normal operations," Yuna explained. "But they became a weakness when we introduced false information. And their entire strategy assumed we would follow standard defensive doctrine," Daeho concluded. "When we didn't, their advantage disappeared." The alien instructors looked at each other in confusion. This wasn't how new species were supposed to behave. New species were supposed to struggle with the advanced technology and sophisticated tactics. They were supposed to need months of training before they could complete even basic scenarios. "Your methods were irregular," Commander Vexthari said carefully. "They were effective," Jaewook replied simply. Around the room, alien cadets from dozens of different species were staring at the humans with expressions that ranged from confusion to amazement. Many of them had been working on this same scenario for months, trying to achieve better results by perfecting their execution of standard tactics. The humans had completed it in their first attempt by throwing out the standard tactics entirely. "We need to review this exercise," Kliktar announced. "There may be irregularities in the scenario design," but even as he spoke, all three instructors knew that wasn't true. The scenario had worked exactly as designed. It was the humans who had done something completely unexpected. As the other cadets filed out of the simulation room, still discussing what they had witnessed, the 5 humans remained behind to pack up their equipment. "Think they'll give us something harder next time?" Hana asked. "Count on it," Daeho replied. Jae-wook looked at the now empty holographic display where the mining station had been. "Good. I'm curious to see what else they think is impossible." None of them noticed Commander Vexithari speaking urgently into a communication device, requesting an immediate meeting with the Academy's senior staff. The first human training exercise was over, but its effects were just beginning to spread through the galactic military establishment. Something had just changed in the way war could be fought, and nobody was quite sure what it meant. News of the humans' unusual performance spread through Kepler Station faster than anyone expected. Within days, senior officers from across the galaxy began arriving to observe these strange new cadets from Earth. They came from the crystalline hierarchies, the reptilian dominion, the hive collectives, and dozens of other species. Jae-wook noticed the increased attention immediately. Everywhere the humans went, they found themselves being watched and discussed. Alien officers would stop their conversations when the humans passed by, then resume talking in hushed voices. "They're treating us like some kind of science experiment," Hana said as they walked to the training center for their 3rd week of exercises. "Let them watch," Daeho replied. "Maybe they'll learn something." The training scenarios became more complex and more frequent. Every day brought new challenges designed to test the humans' abilities and, more importantly, to find their limits. The Academy's instructors seemed determined to prove that the mining station victory had been a lucky accident. The first new test was a multi-dimensional tactical puzzle that typically required psychic abilities to solve. The scenario placed the cadets in command of a fleet that had to navigate through space where normal physics didn't apply. Up could become down without warning, and distances could change based on the observer's thoughts. Most species needed members with natural telepathic or precognitive abilities to handle such scenarios. The crystalline cadets used their natural ability to process multiple probability streams simultaneously. The Hive Collective cadets shared thoughts directly to coordinate their actions. The humans had no psychic abilities at all. "This is impossible," said Yuna, staring at her displays as the space around their simulated ships twisted in ways that hurt her mind to think about. "No," Jae-wook said calmly. "It's just different rules." He began treating the impossible space like a puzzle to be understood rather than a force to be overcome. If up could become down, then direction was relative. If distance could change, then distance was a variable rather than a constant. "Hana, can you map the changes in the physics?" he asked. "I can try," she replied, her fingers flying over her controls. "If I treat each change as a data point instead of an impossible event." Within minutes, she had found patterns in the chaos. The physics changes weren't random, they followed rules. Just not the rules anyone expected. Kijun began moving their ships not according to normal navigation principles, but according to Hana's pattern analysis. When the space twisted, their ships twisted with it. When distances changed, they changed their formation to match. Daeho coordinated the fleet movements like a conductor leading an orchestra, responding to the rhythm of the shifting space rather than fighting against it. Yuna found that while she couldn't read minds like the psychic species, she could read the patterns in their communications and predict what they would do next. The humans completed the impossible scenario in record time. The second test was zero-gravity combat in a hostile environment. The scenario placed cadets inside a damaged space station that was venting atmosphere, with failing gravity generators and hostile aliens hunting them through the corridors. Most species approach this as a straightforward combat problem. They used their natural abilities, the reptilian's strength, the insectoid's coordination, the crystalline's tactical analysis, to fight their way through the hostile forces. The humans treated it like a 3-dimensional puzzle. Kijun realized that in zero gravity, every surface could be a wall or a floor. He began moving through the station in ways that confused the enemies, who were programmed to expect traditional ground-based tactics. Hana used the station's failing systems to her advantage, turning broken equipment into weapons and using the venting atmosphere to blind enemy sensors. Daeho organized their movement through the station like a dance, with each human playing a specific role in a coordinated pattern that kept them always one step ahead of their hunters. Jae-wook analyzed the enemy behavior and realized they were following predictable patrol patterns. He guided his team through routes that avoided the enemies entirely, rather than fighting them directly. Yuna listened to the station's emergency broadcasts and realized they contained clues about safe areas and hidden passages that the designers had included for advanced players. They completed the combat scenario without firing a single shot. The third test was a resource management crisis with no correct solution. The cadets were given command of a colony ship with failing life support systems, not enough supplies for everyone aboard, and no possibility of rescue. This scenario was designed to teach acceptance of necessary sacrifice. Every species that had taken this test had been forced to choose who would live and who would die. It was a lesson in the harsh realities of military command. The humans refused to accept the premise. "There has to be another way," Hana said, studying the ship's systems. "The test says there isn't," Yuna replied. "We're supposed to choose who dies." "Then we change the test," Jae-wook said simply. They began tearing apart the scenario's assumptions. If the life support was failing, could it be repaired? If there weren't enough supplies, could more be created? If rescue was impossible, could they rescue themselves? Hana discovered that the ship's manufacturing systems could be reconfigured to produce life support components. Ki-jun found ways to extend the existing supplies by changing how they were distributed. Daeho organized the colonists into work crews that could implement emergency repairs. Yuna realized that the no-rescue parameter was based on normal communication ranges, but the ship had industrial equipment that could be converted into a more powerful transmitter. Jae-wook coordinated all their efforts into a comprehensive survival plan that turned the dying colony ship into a self-sufficient vessel capable of reaching safety on its own. Nobody died. Nobody had to be sacrificed. The humans had found a fourth option in a scenario designed to have only three. The watching officers were no longer just curious. They were becoming concerned. The fourth test was diplomatic negotiations with hostile alien psychology profiles. The scenario required the cadets to negotiate with species whose minds worked in completely alien ways, beings who valued concepts like honor, hierarchy, and tradition above practical concerns. Most species approached this test by studying alien psychology and trying to think like their opponents. The crystallines used logical analysis. The reptilians relied on shows of strength. The insectoids offered collective solutions. The humans ignored alien psychology entirely. Instead, they focused on finding what each alien species actually wanted beneath their cultural expressions. Honor-focused species wanted respect. Hierarchy-focused species wanted security in their position. Tradition-focused species wanted continuity. The humans offered each species what they truly needed while packaging it in terms their culture could accept. They turned negotiations from contests of will into collaborative problem-solving exercises. They achieved peace agreements that had never been reached before in the scenario's history. By the fifth test, 3 instructors had requested transfers off the station, and Commander Vexthari was showing signs of what could only be called stress. Her crystalline skin had developed cracks, and she had begun muttering to herself in her native language. The final test was supposed to be the ultimate challenge, a hostage rescue aboard a damaged vessel in hostile space. With limited time, limited resources, and enemies who were willing to kill their captives rather than surrender. Every previous group that had attempted this scenario had been forced to accept partial success at best. The best results involved saving most of the hostages, while accepting that some would die in the process. The humans saved all the hostages, captured all the enemies, repaired the damaged vessel, and did it in half the time any other species had ever managed. They did this by treating the entire scenario as an engineering problem rather than a military one. Hana realized that the ship's damage could be used to their advantage, creating blind spots in enemy surveillance. Ki-jun used the ship's internal systems to track enemy movements and predict their behavior. Daeho coordinated simultaneous operations across multiple levels of the vessel. Yuna intercepted and decoded enemy communications, learning their plans before they could execute them. Jae-wook analyzed the entire situation and found ways to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. When the scenario ended, the observation room was completely silent. Commander Vexthari stared at the results display for a long moment. Then she turned to her fellow instructors and said something that had never been said before in the Academy's history. "I don't think we're teaching them," she said quietly. "I think they're teaching us." Drill Master Clicktar's compound eyes were fixed on the humans as they calmly packed up their equipment and prepared to leave the simulation room. "What are they?" he buzzed. Nobody had an answer. The humans walked out of the training center discussing their performance and already thinking about what tomorrow's challenges might bring. They had no idea that their instructors were having emergency meetings about them, or that reports about their abilities were being sent to military commands across the galaxy. All they knew was that they were learning interesting things about galactic military doctrine and finding it surprisingly limited. The arrival of the Unbreakable Battalion changed the atmosphere at Kepler Station completely. These were not instructors or observers. These were the galaxy's most elite warriors. Veterans who had never lost a training exercise in their long careers. Commander Thekvar of the Reptilian Dominion led the battalion. He was ancient by human standards, with over 3 centuries of combat experience carved into the scars that covered his scaled hide. His yellow eyes held the cold intelligence of a predator who had survived countless battles. Beside him stood Captain Zilneth of the Crystalline Hierarchies, her faceted body containing tactical processing power that could calculate 1,000,000 variables simultaneously. Her crystalline structure had grown complex over decades of military service, each new formation representing another level of strategic thinking. The insectoid hive commander, Frictal, led a dozen linked minds that could coordinate operations across multiple fronts with perfect precision. His compound eyes could track hundreds of individual elements in a battle scenario, while his subordinate minds handled logistics and communication. These were joined by elite officers from 20 other species, each representing the peak of their civilization's military evolution. They had come to Kepler Station with one purpose: to demonstrate proper military hierarchy and crush what they saw as human overconfidence. "The situation has gotten out of hand," Commander Thekvar explained to the gathered Academy staff. "New species are supposed to struggle. They are supposed to learn humility. These humans are developing dangerous ideas about their own capabilities." Commander Vexithari's crystalline skin flickered with nervous energy. "They approach every scenario differently than expected. Our traditional teaching methods seem ineffective." "Then we will use different methods," Thekvar replied. His voice carried the authority of centuries. "We will show them what real military expertise looks like." The scenario they designed was brutal even by Academy standards. It was urban warfare simulation across multiple city districts, with the humans vastly outnumbered and outgunned. The battalion members would play the role of occupying forces, while the 5 human cadets would attempt to liberate the city. The odds were 50-1 against the humans. "This will end their winning streak," Captain Zilneth calculated. "The probability of human success is approximately 0.003%. The simulation began at dawn with the humans positioned in the outer districts of a massive city. The Unbreakable Battalion controlled the center, with superior weapons, better equipment, and perfect coordination between their various species' abilities. Jaewook studied the tactical display and felt a familiar calm settle over his mind. He had been in similar situations before, though never in a simulation. Sometimes the best strategy was not to fight the war your enemy wanted you to fight. "This isn't about taking the city," he said to his team. "This is about making it impossible for them to hold it." "What do you mean?" Daeho asked. "They're thinking like occupiers," Jaewook explained. "Occupiers need to control territory, maintain supply lines, and protect their positions. We just need to make all of that impossible." The humans scattered into the city, but not in the way the battalion expected. Instead of forming military units trying to seize objectives, they melted into the urban environment like ghosts. Hana found the city's infrastructure control center and began her work. The battalion had expected cyber warfare, so they had hardened their military systems. They had not expected someone to hack the city's civilian systems and turn them into weapons. Traffic lights began creating impossible jams that trapped battalion vehicles. Water mains burst in carefully calculated locations, flooding key intersections. Power grids failed in patterns that left the battalion's positions in darkness while lighting up their enemies. Yuna had tapped into the city's communication networks and was creating phantom radio chatter that sent battalion units chasing false targets across the urban landscape. She made their own coordination work against them by feeding them contradictory information that sounded perfectly legitimate. Ki-jun was building improvised weapons from civilian materials, but his real genius was in creating traps that used the city itself as a weapon. Maintenance tunnels became killing zones. Construction sites became mazes that channeled enemy forces into predetermined ambush points. Daeho had done something that the battalion's tactical computers couldn't process. He had organized the civilian population in the simulation. The computer-generated citizens weren't just background elements anymore. They were intelligent sources, supply networks, and additional eyes and ears throughout the city. By noon, the situation had deteriorated beyond all projections. Commander Thekvar found himself commanding forces that were fighting an enemy they couldn't locate in a city that had turned hostile to their presence. His centuries of experience had not prepared him for warfare, where the battlefield itself was an active opponent. "Where are they?" demanded Captain Zilneth, her calculations becoming increasingly frantic as her tactical models failed to predict human behavior. "Everywhere and nowhere," replied Hive Commander Vriktal. His linked minds were reporting contact with human forces across the city. But when his units arrived at those locations, they found only empty buildings and more traps. The battalion was fighting shadows, but the shadows were winning. Thekvar's veteran instincts told him something was fundamentally wrong with this engagement. His forces were superior in every measurable way, but they were losing. Not just losing, they were being systematically dismantled by an enemy that refused to fight the kind of war he understood. By evening, the impossible was happening. The unbreakable battalion was being broken, not by superior force or better equipment, but by an approach to warfare that made their own strengths irrelevant. The humans weren't trying to defeat the battalion in direct combat. They were making it impossible for the battalion to function as a military force. Supply convoys disappeared into the urban maze and never reached their destinations. Communications became unreliable as false signals flooded the networks. Positions that should have been secure became death traps as the city's infrastructure turned against the occupiers. Most disturbing of all, the civilian population had become actively hostile. In every previous simulation, civilians were passive elements that could be controlled through proper security measures. These civilians were organized, coordinated, and working against the occupation forces with intelligence that came from sources the battalion couldn't identify. Commander Thekvar realized he was not fighting 5 human cadets. He was fighting an entire city that the humans had somehow turned into a single, coordinated weapon. As night fell, something unprecedented occurred in the history of galactic military training. Commander Thekvar, veteran of 300 years of warfare, called for a communication channel to the human commanders. "This is Commander Thekvar to human forces." His voice carried over the city's communication systems. I request a ceasefire for negotiation purposes." The response came from Jae-wook, speaking from a location that could have been anywhere in the city. "We're listening, Commander. Your tactics are..." Thekvar paused, searching for words. "They are unlike anything in established military doctrine." "You are not fighting the war we prepared for." "No," Jae-wook replied simply. "We're fighting the war that actually exists." There was a long silence over the communication channel. Then Thekvar said something that no one in the observation room expected to hear. "I formally surrender my position to you, Cadet Jae-wook." The words sent shockwaves through every observer at the academy. The unbreakable battalion had never surrendered. Not once in their long history of training exercises and actual combat. But the surrender was not over. Within the next hour, Captain Zilneth called for her own ceasefire. Her crystalline calculations had reached an inescapable conclusion. Continuing the exercise would only result in the complete destruction of her forces without achieving any objectives. Hive Commander Vriktal's linked minds reached consensus shortly after. The coordination that had always been their greatest strength had become a liability in a city where every communication could be intercepted and turned against them. One by one, the elite officers of the unbreakable battalion surrendered their positions, not because they had been defeated in the traditional sense, but because they had realized they were fighting an entirely different kind of war than they had ever prepared for. In the observation room, complete silence reigned. The humans had not just won an impossible scenario. They had forced the galaxy's most elite warriors to surrender without ever engaging them in direct combat. As the simulation ended and the city lights faded, Jaewook and his team gathered in the central square that had been the battalion's last stronghold. "Think they learned anything?" Hana asked. "Probably not what they expected to learn," Daeho replied. Yuna was listening to the communication channels, where shocked alien voices were trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Kijun looked around at the simulated city that had become their weapon. "What do we do now?" Jaewook considered the question. Around them, the galaxy's military establishment was realizing that their understanding of warfare had just become obsolete. The emergency session in the Academy's main conference room brought together military leaders from across known space. Representatives from 43 different species sat around the circular table, their various forms creating a living museum of galactic evolution. The air recycling systems worked over time to accommodate the different atmospheric needs of so many diverse beings. Jaewook stood at the center of the circle, feeling oddly calm despite being surrounded by some of the most powerful military minds in the galaxy. Beside him, Hana, Daeho, Kijun, and Yuna waited patiently for the questions that would surely come. Grand Admiral Nexus of the Galactic Defense Force spoke first. His species was ancient, with a body that seemed to be made of living starlight. When he communicated, it was through patterns of light that were translated by the room's systems. "Explain. Your methods," the translation rendered his words in a voice that sounded like distant thunder. "We don't have methods," Jaewook replied honestly. "We just solve problems." "That is not an answer," declared General Korthak of the warrior clans, his forearms gesturing dismissively. "Military operations require doctrine, structure, predictable procedures." "Why?" asked Hana simply. The question created a moment of stunned silence around the table. Military doctrine was so fundamental to galactic civilization that questioning its necessity was like questioning the need for gravity. Admiral Teshvi of the Ocean Worlds leaned forward, her aquatic form shimmering in its environmental suit. "Because without doctrine there is only chaos. How can commanders coordinate millions of soldiers across multiple star systems without established procedures? The same way a city coordinates millions of people every day," Yuna replied. "Not through rigid control, but through communication and adaptation." "Cities are not military operations," objected Marshal Kreenock of the desert colonies. "Aren't they?" Daeho asked. "Cities manage resources, coordinate different groups with different needs, respond to emergencies, and adapt to changing conditions. That sounds like military operations to me." Commander Thekvar, still bearing the psychological scars of his surrender, spoke quietly from his position at the table. "They fought us like we were an infection in a living organism. The city became immune to our presence. Because you treated it like a dead thing to be conquered," Kijun explained. "Cities are alive. They have rhythms, patterns, and needs. If you work with those patterns instead of against them, the city becomes your ally." Captain Zilneth's crystalline form flickered with rapid calculations. "Your approach lacks mathematical precision. How can strategy function without quantifiable parameters?" "Math is a tool," Jaewook said. "A very useful tool. But when you make the tool more important than the problem you're trying to solve, the tool becomes a limitation instead of a help. Then how do you make decisions without calculation?" She pressed. "We calculate," Hana said. "We just don't limit ourselves to the numbers we can measure easily. Human intuition is calculation. Too, it's just calculation that includes variables we can't put into equations." Grand Marshal Vorthan of the Core Worlds raised what might have been an eyebrow on his energy-based form. "You speak of intuition as if it were reliable." "Intuition is random, uncontrollable." "Is it?" Yuna challenged. "When you hear music, do you calculate the mathematical relationships between the notes to know if you like it? When you see a battle formation, do you run probability analyses to know if it feels wrong?" "That's different," Vorthan replied, but his certainty seemed shaken. "Is it really?" Jaewook asked. "You've all been fighting for so long that you've developed instincts about warfare. Those instincts process information faster than your conscious minds can follow. We just trust those instincts instead of overriding them with rigid procedures." Fleet Admiral Kexnara of the Spiral Arm Coalition had been listening silently, her insectoid features unreadable. Now she clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. "Your success rate in the simulations was unprecedented. But simulations are not reality. How do we know your methods would work in actual combat?" You don't, Deho said simply. But you know your current methods aren't working as well as they could. Every species here has been fighting the same wars the same ways for centuries. When was the last time any of you achieved a truly decisive victory? The silence that followed was answer enough. Supreme Commander Thias of the Outer Rim Territories leaned back in her chair. You propose to revolutionize military thinking based on the performance of 5 individuals in training exercises. We don't propose anything, Jae-wook replied. You asked us to explain our approach. We're explaining it. But surely you understand the implications, pressed Admiral Nexus. If we adopt your methods, we would need to restructure our entire military establishment. Maybe, Hana said. Or maybe you would just need to give your people permission to think for themselves. Military organizations require hierarchy, stated General Korthak firmly. Soldiers must follow orders without question. Why? Kijun asked. What happens when the orders are wrong? Orders are created by superior officers with better information and broader perspective. What happens when the situation changes faster than orders can be updated? Yuna pressed. What happens when the enemy does something unexpected? Deho added. What happens when the superior officers are not present to give new orders? Jae-wook continued. The questions came faster than the military leaders could answer them, each one exposing assumptions that had never been challenged. Commander Thekvar spoke into the growing tension. I have fought in 17 major campaigns. I have studied warfare for 3 centuries. Everything I learned told me that the humans should have been crushed in minutes during our exercise. He paused, his yellow eyes fixed on Jae-wook. Instead, they made me realize that I was fighting the wrong war entirely. They didn't try to beat our tactics. They made our tactics irrelevant. How do we train for that? Asked Admiral Teshavi. How do we prepare for enemies who fight wars we don't understand? You learn to fight wars you don't understand, Jae-wook said. You prepare your people to adapt instead of preparing them to follow procedures. That sounds like chaos, Marshal Kreenock muttered. It sounds like life, Hana replied. When was the last time your life went exactly according to plan? Over the following weeks, the transformation began slowly, then accelerated beyond anyone's expectations. The Academy's curriculum was restructured around what became known as the human paradigm. Instead of teaching cadets to memorize procedures, instructors began teaching them to analyze problems. Instead of drilling formations, they practiced improvisation. The changes spread beyond Kepler Station. Military academies across the galaxy requested human instructors. Veteran officers who had been set in their ways for decades began experimenting with flexible tactics. War games that had followed predictable patterns for centuries suddenly became unpredictable as commanders started thinking outside established doctrine. Jae-wook found himself appointed as the youngest strategic advisor in galactic history, despite technically still being a cadet. His first official recommendation was that the appointment system itself needed to be more flexible. Hana became the head of a new adaptive technology division, where she worked with engineers from dozens of species to develop equipment that could be modified for unexpected uses. Deho founded the Coalition Leadership Institute, teaching command techniques that emphasized communication and creativity over rigid authority. Kijun established the Improvised Warfare Research Center, where traditional weapons specialists learned to think of every tool as a potential weapon and every environment as a potential ally. Yuna created the Galactic Communication Evolution Project, developing new ways for different species to share information and coordinate operations without falling into predictable patterns. The D5 humans who had entered the Academy as unknown cadets from a primitive world became the architects of a fundamental shift in how the galaxy understood conflict. 6 months after the surrender at Kepler Station, the first new class of human cadets arrived. They found a very different academy than their predecessors had encountered. Alien instructors who had once dismissed human methods now studied Earth military history with the same reverence they had once reserved for ancient galactic war masters. The rigid procedures that had once defined military training had been replaced by flexible frameworks that adapted to each situation. Commander Vexthari, her crystalline form now showing new growth patterns that indicated expanded thinking, greeted the new human arrivals personally. Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy, she said, her voice carrying none of the condescension that had marked her first meeting with humans. We have much to learn from each other. The new cadets looked around at the station that would be their home, seeing aliens and humans working together in ways that would have been impossible just months before. One of them, a young woman named Jin-A, asked the question that was on all their minds. What exactly did the first human class do here? Vexathari's crystalline features formed what might have been a smile. They taught us that the best way to win a war is to refuse to fight it the way your enemy expects. As the new cadets began their training, reports were arriving from across the galaxy about the success of human-inspired tactics in real conflicts.